The roars echoing from the throne chamber could be heard throughout the entire fortress of Ashenfell. Not roars of battle. These were worse. They were the guttural, primal screams of a king losing himself to an ancient curse. Nyra pressed herself against the cold stone wall, her basket of healing supplies clutched to her chest as another inhuman snarl tore through the twilight air. Around her, nobles and guards alike scrambled for cover, their faces drained of color with terror. "Get back." A royal guard shoved past her, his silver armor clanking. The Alpha King's rage is breaking through the containment wards. "Clear the corridor." But Nyra couldn't move. Through the reinforced archway, she could see him. King Maelor Nitrath, the most feared Alpha in existence, chained to the obsidian-binding pillars like a feral beast. The massive iron and silver chains groaned as he fought against them, his usually commanding features twisted with uncontrollable fury. Blood dripped from his wrists and ankles, where the enchanted shackles bit into his skin. His eyes, which she'd heard were normally the color of winter storms, now blazed crimson with an otherworldly rage that seemed to pulse with dark energy. "How long has he been like this?" Nyra whispered to a trembling healer's apprentice beside her. 5 days, the girl whimpered, clutching her medical bag like a lifeline. "Ever since the blood moon rose. They say something triggered the Nitrath curse, the madness that's killed every king in his bloodline. The court mages tried everything. Binding spells, sedation drafts, even tried to knock him unconscious with sleeping magic. Nothing works. He just gets angrier. More violent." Nyra knew she should leave. She was only here to deliver medicinal herbs to the royal healer, a job she'd taken because no one else would hire a rejected Omega with a scarred wolf mark on her neck. She had no business being anywhere near the throne chamber, no right to witness the kingdom's greatest secret, that their indomitable Alpha King was cursed, chained, and slowly losing his mind. But something made her hesitate. Maybe it was the way Maelor's roars broke into something that sounded almost like anguish between the rage. Maybe it was the blood. She could see matting his dark hair, evidence of him thrashing against the stone pillars hard enough to crack his skull. Or maybe it was because she recognized that kind of fury, the kind that came from being trapped, helpless, and desperate for an escape that didn't exist. "Miss, you need to move." A court official grabbed her elbow, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "When the containment wards fail, and they will fail, the king will tear through anyone in his path. We've already lost 3 guards and 2 mages. You need to get to the lower levels. Now." "What happens if the wards fail completely?" Nyra's voice barely carried over the snarling. "Then the curse consumes him entirely." The official's face was ashen. "And we lose our king. Our kingdom. Everything." He shook his head. "The council is already discussing succession. Trying to figure out who can possibly lead Ashenfell after what's coming." The words hit her like a physical blow. They were giving up on him. This powerful, legendary Alpha who'd protected this kingdom for a decade. They were already planning his funeral. Another roar shattered the air, and this time she heard it clearly. Beneath the rage was pure, desperate terror. The sound of someone drowning and unable to surface. Nyra set down her basket. "I need to get closer." "Are you insane?" The official grabbed her arm harder. "The curse makes him uncontrollable. He doesn't recognize friend from foe. He'll kill you without even knowing who you are." "Maybe." Nyra pulled free, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Or maybe everyone's been approaching him wrong." "What are you? Wait, you can't." But Nyra was already moving, slipping past the official while he was distracted by another surge of power from the throne chamber. Her feet carried her through the archway before her mind could catch up with the absolute insanity of what she was doing. Around her, she could hear gasps, shouted warnings, the sound of guards reaching for weapons they wouldn't dare use on their king. But all she could focus on was the Alpha in front of her, this king that everyone had given up on, this man who'd been chained like a monster and left to rage himself to death. The throne chamber was a disaster. Scorch marks from failed spells blackened the walls. The marble floor was cracked and stained with blood. Magical circles drawn in silver and gold flickered weakly, their power nearly exhausted. And in the center of it all, chained between two massive obsidian pillars, was Maelor Nightrath. He was magnificent, even consumed by the curse, even bloodied and wild. There was something terrifyingly beautiful about him. Tall, powerfully built, with dark hair that fell across eyes that burned like dying stars. His chest heaved with each ragged breath, his hands clenched into fists that had clearly shattered against the pillars more than once. Naira stopped 10 feet from the containment ward's edge, close enough to see the way his entire body trembled, not just with rage, but with exhaustion. Close enough to see that beneath all that fury was a man who'd been fighting this curse for 5 days without rest, without relief, without hope. "Your Majesty," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Maelor's head snapped toward her, his crimson eyes locking onto her with feral intensity. The growl that rumbled from his chest was a clear warning. Come closer and die. Naira's hands were shaking, but she forced herself to take another step. Then another. The containment ward flickered against her skin like static electricity, but she pushed through it. Behind her, she heard someone scream for her to stop, heard the sound of guards moving to intervene. "Don't," a voice commanded. The royal advisor, Tavrin, his silver robes swirling as he appeared in the doorway. "Everyone stand down. If we interfere, and she triggers his hunting instinct." He didn't finish.
Didn't need to.
Naira barely heard him. Her entire world had narrowed to the alpha in front of her, to the way his eyes tracked her every movement with predatory focus. She could see his muscles coiling, preparing to lunge the moment she got close enough. Could see the curse writhing beneath his skin like living shadows. "I know you're in there," she whispered, taking another step. "I know you're scared. I know you've been fighting this alone for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to have someone on your side." The growling hitched. "Just for a second. I know what it's like," Naira continued, her voice cracking. "When everyone sees you as something broken, something dangerous, something that needs to be locked away or put down before you hurt someone." She was 5 feet away now, close enough to see the silver chains cutting into his wrists. "But you're not just the curse. You're not just the rage. You're still in there, fighting. Still holding on." Maelor's breathing changed. Still heavy, still labored, but different. Like he was listening. "I was rejected," Naira said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "By my pack. By my alpha. He marked me as broken, as worthless, and cast me out in front of everyone. And for years, I believed him. Believed that's all I would ever be. Someone not worth keeping." She was 3 feet away now, close enough that Maelor could reach her if he lunged. Close enough that the curse's energy made her skin prickle and burn. "But maybe we're both more than what they said we were," she whispered. "Maybe we're both still worth fighting for." Slowly, carefully, she raised her trembling hand and reached toward his chest, toward the place where she could see his heart pounding beneath skin that seemed to pulse with dark energy. "Don't," someone breathed from the doorway. "The curse will consume her." But Naira's fingers were already touching his chest, pressing against the place where his heart hammered like a war drum. And the world stopped. The rage vanished. The curse stilled. The crimson in Maelor's eyes flickered, dimmed, then cleared to reveal the winter storm gray beneath. The shadows writhing under his skin dissolved like smoke in sunlight. The chains stopped rattling. The air stopped crackling with violent energy. Silence fell over the throne chamber like a blanket of snow. Maelor stared at her, his chest still heaving, his body still trembling, but now with something that looked more like shock than fury. His lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. Naira felt it then, a connection snapping into place between them. Not a bond. Not magic. Something deeper. Something that felt like two broken pieces of the same soul finally finding each other across an impossible distance. "You." Maelor's voice was hoarse, barely recognizable. "How did you?" Behind them, the throne chamber had erupted in shocked whispers, gasps, the rustle of robes as mages and advisors crowded forward to witness the impossible. "She stopped it," someone breathed. She stopped the curse. That's not possible. No one can. Look at him. His eyes are clear. The rage is gone. Tavrin pushed through the crowd, his ancient face pale with disbelief. Your Majesty, do you know where you are? Maelor's gaze didn't leave Nyra's face. Ashenfell, the throne chamber. I've been. His voice cracked. How long? 5 days, Your Majesty. 5. Maelor's eyes widened with horror.
The guards.
The mages. They're alive, Tavrin said quickly. Injured but alive. Thanks to the containment wards and... He glanced at Nyra. And, apparently, thanks to whoever this is. For the first time, Maelor seemed to truly see her. Not just as the person who'd stopped his curse, but as a person. His gaze traveled from her simple servant's dress to the medicinal herb stains on her fingers to the rejection scar on her neck, a mark that, in wolf culture, branded her as unwanted. As less than. You're not a mage, he said quietly. Not a healer. Not even Pack from that mark. No, Your Majesty. Nyra tried to step back, suddenly aware of how inappropriate this was, a rejected Omega touching a king, standing in his throne chamber, like she had any right to be there. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to overstep. But the moment she pulled her hand away, Maelor gasped. The crimson bled back into his eyes. The shadows began coiling under his skin again. The curse was returning. Don't. His voice was strained, desperate. Don't let go. Nyra's hand snapped back to his chest instinctively, and instantly, the curse retreated. The red faded. The shadows dissolved. The throne chamber went silent again, but this time the silence was heavy with understanding, with implications that made the court mages exchange worried glances and the guards tighten their grips on their weapons. A soul's park, Tavrin whispered, his voice filled with awe and fear. After all these centuries, a true soul's park. What does that mean? Nyra asked, her hand still pressed to Maelor's chest, feeling his heartbeat gradually slow to something almost normal. It means, Maelor said, his voice rough but steady, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her breath catch, that you're the only thing keeping me alive. The only thing standing between me and the curse that's killed every king in my bloodline. He leaned forward as much as the chains would allow, close enough that she could feel his breath against her face. It means you just became the most important person in this kingdom, he continued, his voice dropping to something that sounded almost like a promise. And it means I'm never letting you go. Around them, the court erupted in whispers, arguments, exclamations of disbelief. But Nyra barely heard them. All she could focus on was the alpha in front of her. This broken king, who'd just found his anchor in the last person anyone would have expected, and the terrifying realization that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't begin to understand. Behind her, she heard Tavrin's voice cutting through the chaos. Someone send word to all the kingdoms. The Alpha King has found his soul's park. Then, quieter, almost to himself. Moon Goddess, help us all. The chains came off an hour later, but Maelor still wouldn't let Nyra move more than arm's length away. Every time she tried to step back, to give him space to be examined by the court healers and mages, the curse of shadows would begin creeping back into his eyes. So she stood there, her hand pressed to his chest, while the entire royal court argued about what to do with her. This is unprecedented, Tavrin said, pacing in front of the throne where Maelor now sat, looking more exhausted than Nyra had ever seen anyone look. A Soulspark bond hasn't manifested in over 300 years. We don't even know if the old texts are accurate about. I don't care about precedent, Maelor interrupted, his voice still rough from 5 days of screaming. I care about facts. And the fact is, without her touch, the curse returns in less than a minute. With her touch, it's completely dormant. That's all I need to know. Your Majesty, we need to understand the mechanics of this bond before we can. Before we can what? Maelor's eyes flashed, and for a moment Nyra saw a glimpse of the alpha that had made kingdoms bow. Before we can decide whether to keep her? She stays, Tavrin. That's not negotiable. I wasn't suggesting otherwise, Tavrin said carefully. But we need to know the extent of the bond. The limitations. The risks. What happens if she's injured? If she falls ill? He glanced at Naira. If she decides she doesn't want to be bound to you for the rest of her life. The question hung in the air like a blade. Naira felt Maelor tense beneath her palm, felt his heartbeat quicken. She should have been terrified. She should have been planning her escape, demanding her freedom, refusing to be chained to a king's curse just because fate or magic or whatever had decided she was his anchor. But when she looked at Maelor, really looked at him, she didn't see the terrifying Alpha King everyone whispered about. She saw the man who'd been fighting a curse alone for 5 days, who'd been chained like an animal and left to die, who was now looking at her with something that might have been hope, or might have been fear that she'd confirm everyone's worst suspicions, that a rejected Omega would never willingly stay with a cursed king. "I'm not going anywhere," she heard herself say. "Not yet. Not until we figure this out." The relief that flooded Maelor's face was almost painful to witness. "Very well," Tavrin said, though his expression suggested he had many more concerns he wasn't voicing. "Then we need to establish some protocols. Living arrangements. Security measures. The court will have questions and we need to—" A commotion at the throne chamber entrance cut him off. Guards were shouting, trying to hold back someone who was demanding entrance. A voice Naira recognized made her blood run cold. "I don't care if he's the Alpha King. That Omega is Emberclaw Pact property, and I'm here to collect what's mine." Naira's hand jerked away from Maelor's chest instinctively, her entire body going rigid with fear. The curse immediately began creeping back, shadows coiling under Maelor's skin, but he grabbed her wrist gently, keeping her hand in place, while his other hand moved to the armrest of his throne with white-knuckled intensity. "Let him in," Maelor said, his voice deadly calm. "I want to meet the Alpha who thinks he has any claim to my Soulspark." The guards parted, and Alpha Draven of Emberclaw strode into the throne chamber like he owned it. Tall, golden-haired, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. His eyes found Naira immediately, and the smile that curved his lips made her stomach turn. "There you are," Draven said, his voice carrying that familiar condescension she remembered from the rejection ceremony. "I've been looking for you for months, little Omega. Imagine my surprise when I heard you'd somehow wormed your way into the royal court." "She didn't worm her way anywhere," Maelor said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "She saved my life. And if you're about to tell me you have any right to her, I suggest you reconsider your next words very carefully." Draven's smile didn't waver. "With all due respect, Your Majesty, this Omega belongs to my pack. She bears my rejection mark, which means she's still bound to Emberclaw law. Whatever service she provided you, I'm sure we can come to some arrangement for compensation." "Service?" Naira found her voice, anger burning through the fear. "You rejected me, cast me out, made sure everyone knew I was worthless, broken, not worth keeping. And now you want compensation? Don't be dramatic, Naira." Draven's tone was patronizing. "The rejection was necessary. You understand that now, don't you? I couldn't have my pack knowing what you really are, what you can do. It would have complicated things. What she really is." Maelor's voice had gone very, very quiet. The kind of quiet that preceded violence. Draven finally seemed to sense he'd made a tactical error. His smile faded slightly. "Has she not told you? Your Soulspark, Your Majesty, is a Veilborn. A rare Omega who can absorb and redirect an Alpha's rage. I've spent years suppressing her abilities, breaking her spirit, making sure she never realized her own power. Because a Veilborn in full control of their abilities is—" He paused. "Well, let's just say she's valuable. Very valuable. To the right Alpha, she could be the perfect weapon." The throne chamber erupted. Mages shouting questions. Guards moving to defensive positions. Tavrin demanding explanations. But Naira barely heard any of it over the roaring in her ears. Years. He'd spent years deliberately breaking her. The rejection hadn't been because she was weak or worthless. It had been calculated. Pull. Designed to keep her powerless, so he could use her. Get out. Mailer's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Get out of my kingdom before I forget that killing a visiting alpha would start a war. Your Majesty, surely we can discuss. There's nothing to discuss. She's mine.
My soul's park.
My anchor. Mine to protect. And if you ever come near her again, if you even think about her again, I will declare war on Emberclaw myself. Mailer stood, his presence filling the throne chamber with barely leashed power. Now get
out.
Draven's face had gone pale with rage, but he wasn't stupid enough to push a cursed Alpha King in his own throne room. He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. You can't keep her locked in this fortress forever, Nitrath, he called back. And when she realizes what she really is, when she learns that her power means she doesn't need your protection, his smile returned.
Well,
we'll see who she chooses then. He left, but his words lingered like poison in the air. Nyra's hand was still pressed to Mailer's chest, but now she could feel his heart racing, could feel the curse trying to surge back, feeding on his rage and fear. Without thinking, she moved closer, her other hand coming up to cup his face. Breathe, she whispered. I'm here. The curse can't touch you while I'm here. Mailer's eyes found hers, and for a moment she saw past the Alpha King to the man underneath, the one who'd been cursed his entire life, who'd watched the madness consume his father and grandfather, who'd lived every day knowing the same fate waited for him. Did you know, he asked quietly, about being Veilborn?
No.
The word came out as barely a whisper. I thought I was just broken.
Weak.
Worthless. That's what he always said. What everyone said. You're not. Mailer's hand came up to cover hers where it rested against his face. You're the strongest person I've ever met. Walking up to a cursed, raging alpha? Risking your life to touch someone everyone else had given up on. His voice roughened. That's not weakness, Nyra. That's courage most warriors would envy. I didn't feel brave. I just couldn't leave you like that.
Why?
The question was simple, but the answer was complicated. Because she knew what it felt like to be given up on. Because she'd heard the anguish beneath his rage. Because for reasons she didn't understand, looking at him didn't scare her the way it should have. Because everyone deserves someone who refuses to give up on them, she finally said. Even cursed kings. Something shifted in Mailer's expression. Something that looked almost like wonder. I don't deserve you, he said softly. But Moon Goddess help me. I'm too selfish to let you go. Then don't, Nyra said, the words surprising her as much as they seemed to surprise him. Don't let go. Don't give up. And maybe we figure this out together. Around them, the court was still in chaos. Tavern was already drafting responses to Draven's claims. Guards were doubling security. Mages were pulling ancient texts about Veilborn bonds. But in that moment, standing in the center of the throne chamber with her hands on a king and his hands on hers, Nyra felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. Like maybe, just maybe, being broken and finding someone else who was broken too wasn't the worst thing that could happen. It might actually be the beginning of something extraordinary. The royal chambers felt like a cage made of silk and gold. Nyra stood by the window overlooking Ashenfell's sprawling courtyards, her arms wrapped around herself as servants bustled around preparing rooms she had no right to occupy. Behind her, she could feel Mailer's presence like a gravitational pull, constant, inescapable, and growing stronger with every hour that passed. This is insane, she whispered to Tavern, who'd been tasked with explaining the new arrangements to her. I can't just live here. Sleep in the Queen's chambers. Pretend I'm anything other than a rejected Omega who happened to touch him at the right moment. You're not pretending anything, Tavern said, his ancient eyes studying her with unsettling intensity. The bond is real, Miss Soul Shadow. Whether you accept it or not doesn't change what you are to him now. And what exactly am I to him? A hostage? A tool? Another chain to replace the ones you just took off? You're his survival. Mailer's voice came from the doorway, rough with exhaustion but edged with steel. He'd bathed and changed into clean clothes, but the haunted look in his eyes remained. And before you argue that I'm being selfish, you're right. I am. Because the alternative is losing my mind and slaughtering everyone in this fortress, and I'd rather be selfish than become that monster again. Naira turned to face him, her heart twisting at the honesty in his voice. So, I'm supposed to just accept that my life isn't my own anymore? That I can't leave this room without you? That every decision I make has to factor in whether it'll trigger your curse? Yes.
No hesitación. No apology.
Just brutal truth. For now, at least. Until we understand this bond. Until we find another way to... He stopped mid-sentence, his face contorting with pain. Naira looked down and felt her stomach drop. The rejection scar on her neck, the ugly, twisted mark Draven had left when he'd cast her out, was glowing. Silver light pulsed beneath her skin, spreading like veins of moonlight across her throat and down her collarbone. Tavrin, Maelor's voice was strained. What is that? The old advisor moved closer, his breath catching. Moon goddess, preserve us. The rejection mark is transforming. Naira, how long has it been burning? It's not burning, Naira said, touching the warm skin. It feels different, like something's waking up under my skin. Because something is. Tavrin's hands trembled as he pulled out an ancient leather journal, flipping through pages covered in faded ink. The Soulspark bond doesn't just anchor an alpha's curse. It heals the Omega's deepest wound. Your rejection mark isn't just fading, it's being rewritten. Into what? Naira's voice cracked. Into a bond mark. The kind that shows you're claimed. Protected. Bound to an alpha by choice, not by force. Tavrin looked between them. But this defies everything we know. Rejection marks don't heal. They're permanent scars designed to mark an Omega as worthless. Naira finished bitterly. As a warning to other packs not to take damaged goods. You're not damaged. Maelor had crossed the room without her noticing, standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. You never were. You don't know that. You don't know me. I know you walked toward a raging, cursed king when everyone else ran away. I know you risked your life to save someone you'd never met. I know that whatever Draven did to break you didn't work, because you're still here. Still standing. Still fighting. His voice dropped lower. That's all I need to know. The mark flared brighter, and Naira gasped as warmth flooded through her body. For the first time in years, the constant ache in her neck, the phantom pain that came with rejection, disappeared completely. I need air, she said suddenly, panic rising in her chest. I need to think. I need. She was moving before anyone could stop her, through the chamber doors and down the corridor, her feet carrying her toward the gardens she'd seen from the window. Behind her, she heard Tavrin shouting something, heard guards scrambling, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. She made it to the courtyard before the screaming started. Naira spun around to see Maelor on his knees in the corridor, 30 feet behind her. The curse was back, shadows writhing under his skin, crimson bleeding into his eyes, his entire body convulsing as the rage tried to consume him again. No, she breathed.
No, no, no.
She was running back before her mind caught up with her body, closing the distance between them in seconds. The moment her hands touched his face, the curse vanished. The shadows dissolved. His eyes cleared. But this time, Maelor grabbed her wrists. Not roughly, but firmly enough that she couldn't pull away. Do you understand now? His voice was ragged, his breathing harsh. 30 feet, Naira. 30 feet was all it took for the curse to come back. Not an hour.
Not a day.
Seconds. Tears burned in her eyes. This isn't fair. No, he agreed, his grip gentling even as his gaze remained intense. It's not fair to either of us. But it's real. The bond is real. And until we figure out how to break it or strengthen it, or whatever the moon goddess intended. He pulled her closer, close enough that she could see gold flecks in his gray eyes. You're mine, Naira's soul shadow, my anchor, my salvation, and I will do whatever it takes to keep you close. Not because I want to control you, but because Without you, I'm already dead. Naira stared at him, this cursed king who just laid his survival at her feet like an offering and a prison all at once. Around them, guards and servants pretended not to watch while definitely watching. Tavern stood in the doorway, his expression grave. She should have been angry, should have been demanding her freedom, her choices, her life back. Instead, she found herself wondering what it meant that being his anchor felt less like a chain and more like the first time in years someone had actually needed her to stay. 3 days after Naira became Maelor's anchor, Alpha Draven returned to Ashenfell with 40 armed wolves at his back. Naira heard the commotion from the throne room where she'd been sitting beside Maelor during morning petitions, a new routine that felt surreal every time someone bowed to her like she belonged there. The heavy doors burst open and guards flooded in, their captain's face pale with urgency. Your Majesty, Alpha Draven of Emberclaw has arrived at the main gates with an armed escort. He's demanding an audience and refuses to leave without. The captain's eyes flicked to Naira. Without the Omega. Maelor's hand tightened on the armrest of his throne, but his voice remained dangerously calm. Let him in. I want to hear what claim he thinks he has to my soul's park. Naira's stomach twisted. She'd known Draven wouldn't give up, but she'd hoped, foolishly, that facing down an Alpha King would be enough to make him retreat. She should have known better. Draven had never backed down from anything he wanted, and he'd made it clear 3 days ago that he wanted her back. The doors opened wider and Draven strode in like he was entering his own territory rather than another king's throne room. His golden hair was pulled back, his ceremonial armor polished to a mirror shine, and his eyes locked onto Naira with possessive intensity that made her skin crawl. Behind him, his warriors formed a wall of muscle and barely leashed aggression. Nitrath, Draven said, his tone just respectful enough to avoid outright insult. I appreciate you seeing me. I'm here to resolve a misunderstanding before it becomes a diplomatic incident. There's no misunderstanding, Maelor replied, his voice like winter frost. You rejected her, cast her out, made her packless, which means she's free to be exactly where she is, under my protection. But that's where you're wrong. Draven's smile was sharp. Rejection doesn't sever pack bonds completely. It simply redefines them. Naira Soulshadow is still Emberclaw property under our laws. She belongs to my territory, my jurisdiction, and by extension, to me. I'm not property, Naira said, her voice shaking but firm. You don't own me, Draven. Don't I? He turned that cold smile on her. Tell me, Naira, do you think it was an accident that I chose you as my Omega? That I courted you, marked you, then rejected you in front of the entire pack? He took a step closer, ignoring Maelor's warning growl. I spent 2 years researching your bloodline. 2 years tracking the genetic markers of Veilborn Omegas. And when I finally found you, hidden in a nothing pack in the Northern Territories, completely unaware of what you were, I knew exactly what I had to do. What are you talking about? But even as Naira asked, something cold was spreading through her chest. I had to break you, Draven said simply. Veilborn Omegas don't manifest their abilities when they're confident, happy, loved. They manifest through trauma, through rejection, through being pushed to the absolute edge of despair. His eyes glittered with something that might have been pride. So, I courted you, made you fall in love with me, let you believe you'd finally found your place, your purpose, your mate. And then I ripped it all away in the most public, humiliating way possible. Naira couldn't breathe. The throne room had gone deadly silent. You did it on purpose, she whispered. All of it. The rejection ceremony. Making me watch while you chose another Omega. Telling everyone I was broken, worthless. Necessary, Draven interrupted. To suppress your power while I studied you. To keep you weak and manageable until I was ready to use what you are. He spread his hands. A Veilborn Omega who can absorb and redirect an Alpha's rage is worth more than gold, Naira. In the right hands, you're not just a healer. You're a weapon. Imagine an Alpha who could drain his enemy's strength, amplify his ally's power, all channeled through an Omega bond. You're insane, Maelor said, standing from his throne. Naira felt the curse stirring beneath his skin, felt his rage building, and instinctively moved closer to press her hand against his arm. The curse settled immediately, but Maelor's eyes remained dangerous. She's not a weapon. She's a person. She's an asset that belongs to Emberclaw, Draven countered. And I'm here to collect what's mine before you damage her further with whatever bond you've forced on her. I didn't force anything. Didn't you? Draven's voice turned mocking. A cursed king finds the one Omega in existence who can calm his rage, and suddenly she's living in your chambers, wearing clothes she could never afford, marked with a bond that conveniently keeps her within 30 feet of you at all times. Tell me, Nightrath, does she even have a choice to leave? The question hung in the air like a blade. Naira felt Maelor tense beside her, felt the terrible truth of Draven's words even as she hated him for speaking them. I challenge you, Draven said into the silence. Ancient law. Single combat. Alpha against alpha. The winner claims the Omega. No, Naira said immediately. You can't just fight over me like I'm a prize. Actually, we can, Draven interrupted. It's written into pack law. The right of challenge supersedes all other claims when two alphas want the same Omega. Winner takes all. He looked at Maelor. Unless the great Alpha King is afraid to face me? Maelor's smile was terrible. I accept your challenge, Draven of Emberclaw. Name your terms. 3 days from now. The old dueling grounds at dawn. No weapons.
No magic.
Just tooth and claw, and the strength the moon goddess gave us. Draven's gaze slid to Naira. And when I win, you're coming home, little Omega. Back where you belong. Back where I can finish what I started and unlock the full potential of what you are. You won't win, Naira said, but her voice shook. Won't I? Draven gestured to his warriors. Your cursed king can barely control his rage with you touching him. What do you think happens in the middle of a fight when he's bleeding, hurting, and desperate? When the curse starts creeping back because you're too far away to help. He leaned in close enough that only she could hear. I'm going to destroy him, Naira. And you're going to watch. Just like you watched when I rejected you. And this time, you'll understand that I always win. He turned and left, his warriors following like a golden tide. The doors slammed shut behind them. Naira looked up at Maelor, saw the determination and fear warring in his eyes, and felt her heart break. Because Draven was right about one thing, in a fight, 30 feet might as well be a death sentence. The Forbidden Archives were buried 3 levels beneath the fortress, protected by wards so old they hummed with power that made Naira's teeth ache. Maelor led her down the spiraling stone staircase in silence, one hand wrapped around hers, not just for the bond, but for comfort neither of them would admit to needing. No one comes down here except the royal family and Tavren, Maelor said as they reached the iron door covered in silver runes. What's written in these books? Most of it died with the kings who lived it. Then why show me now? Naira asked, though she already knew. The duel was 2 days away, and they both needed answers neither of them wanted to find. Because you deserve to know what you're anchored to. He pressed his palm to the door, and it swung open with a groan that sounded almost like a warning. You deserve to know what this curse has done to every man in my bloodline. What it will eventually do to me. The archives were vast and cold, filled with rows of ancient books and scrolls that smelled of decay and secrets. Tavren was already waiting for them, standing beside a stone table where he'd laid out several leather-bound volumes, their pages yellowed with age. I was hoping you wouldn't come down here, Tavren said quietly. Ignorance might have been kinder. Ignorance won't help her survive what's coming, Maelor replied. He guided Naira to the table, his presence solid and warm at her back. Show her. All of it. Tavren opened the first book with reverent care. The pages showed detailed illustrations of men, kings, Naira realized, in various stages of transformation. In the early images, they looked normal, powerful, regal. But with each page turn, the crimson bled deeper into their eyes, the shadows grew darker beneath their skin, until the final images showed creatures that barely looked human anymore. The Nightrath curse. Tavern began, his voice taking on the cadence of a history he'd recited too many times. Started 7 generations ago, when King Aldrich Nightrath betrayed a sacred oath to the moon goddess. In his arrogance, he slaughtered a pack of peaceful Omegas to claim their territory. The goddess cursed his bloodline in response. Every male heir would carry a rage they could never fully control, a madness that would grow stronger with each passing year until it consumed them completely. How long? Nyra's voice was barely a whisper. How long did they last? Aldrich died at 32, raving mad and unrecognizable. His son lasted until 28. The next generation, 25. Tavern turned more pages, each one showing a shorter reign, a faster descent. Maelor's father lasted until 29. He's currently 26. The numbers felt like a countdown to execution. Nyra's hand tightened in Maelor's. And the Soulspark bond? That's supposed to stop it. Not stop it. Anchor it. Tavern pulled out another book, this one even older. There have been 3 confirmed Soulspark bonds in our recorded history. The bond creates a tether between an Omega and an Alpha. The Omega absorbs the Alpha's rage, filters it, returns it as calm, like a living ward against the curse. But it worked, didn't it? Those kings survived. The silence that followed her question was answer enough. They survived longer, Tavern said finally. King Hadrian Nightrath found his Soulspark at 23. He lived until 31, 8 extra years. But his Soulspark, an Omega named Alara, died 2 months before he did. The bond had drained her completely. By the end, she was a hollow shell, barely able to speak, her body consuming itself trying to contain his rage. Nyra felt sick. And the others? King Theron's Soulspark lasted 5 years before the curse overwhelmed her. She walked into the moonlight one night and simply stopped breathing. No injury, no illness. Just burned out from the inside. Tavern turned to another page, showing a delicate illustration of a woman with silver light pouring from her eyes and mouth. And King Valen's Soulspark went mad. Started claiming she could hear the curse whispering to her, promising to devour her too. She took her own life rather than wait for it to claim her. Stop. Maelor's voice was rough. She doesn't need to hear. Yes, I do, Nyra interrupted, her own voice steadier than she felt. If I'm going to be your anchor, I need to know what that means. All of it. Tavern met her eyes, with something that looked like respect. The pattern is consistent. The Soulspark bond works, but it's parasitic. The Omega gives, and gives until there's nothing left. The curse doesn't just feed on the Alpha's rage, it feeds on the bond itself, on the connection between souls. And eventually, he closed the book gently. Eventually, it consumes both of them. How long? Nyra asked. How long do I have before it starts consuming me? There's no way to know. Alara lasted 8 years. Theron's bond lasted 5. Valen's only 3. Tavern's ancient face was lined with sorrow. But they were all full-blood Omegas from powerful packs, trained in magic and bonding from childhood. You're untrained, rejected, weakened from years of suppression. If Draven is right about you being Veilborn, that might buy you more time, or it might make you burn faster because you're channeling more power than your body can handle. Nyra looked at the illustrations again, at the women who'd tried to save their kings and died in the process. At the kings who'd lived a few extra years before the madness claimed them anyway. At the curse that had been devouring the Nightrath bloodline for 7 generations and showed no signs of mercy. In 2 days, I'm fighting Draven for the right to keep you by my side, Maelor said quietly. But maybe he's right. Maybe I'm being selfish keeping you chained to a curse that's going to kill us both. Maybe the kindest thing I could do is let you go before the bond destroys you. Nyra turned to face him fully, saw the anguish in his eyes, the terrible love that was already taking root despite the impossibility of their situation. She thought about Draven's cruelty, about being used as a weapon, about the years she'd spent believing she was worthless because one Alpha had decided to break her for his own gain. Then she thought about Maelor's hand in hers, about the way the curse vanished when she touched him, about how, for the first time in years, she felt like someone actually needed her, not as a tool, but as herself. "I'm not leaving," she said, the words feeling like both a vow and a death sentence. "Not before the duel. Not after. Not until we find another way, or—" She couldn't finish that sentence. "Or we burn together," Mailer finished for her, his voice breaking. He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "I don't want to kill you, Naira. I don't want to be the curse that consumes you." "Then we fight it," she whispered back. "Together. Until we can't anymore." Above them, Tavern watched the two souls binding themselves to an impossible fate and said a prayer to a goddess who'd already proven she didn't grant mercy to the Nitrath bloodline. In 2 days, the duel would decide who claimed Naira's bond. But the real question, the one none of them could answer, was how long she'd survive either choice. It happened the night before the duel. Naira was in the royal chambers, trying to sleep while Mailer paced restlessly by the window. The bond required them to stay close even during rest, so they'd fallen into an awkward routine of sharing space while maintaining careful distance. She just closed her eyes when the pain hit. Her rejection scar, the one that had been transforming into something new, suddenly blazed with agony. Not the warm glow of the Souls Park bond, but something old and vicious that felt like claws digging into her throat. Naira gasped, sitting up so fast the room spun. "Naira?" Mailer was at her side instantly, his hands on her shoulders. "What's wrong? Is it the curse?"
Did I?
"No," she managed, her voice strangled. "Something else. Something." The compulsion slammed into her like a physical force. Her body stood without her permission, her legs carrying her toward the chamber doors despite every instinct screaming at her to stop. She felt like a passenger in her own flesh, watching in horror as her hand reached for the door handle. "Naira, what are you doing?" Mailer grabbed her arm, but she shook him off with strength she didn't possess. "Stop. You can't leave," the bond distance. But her body was already moving into the corridor, and she felt Mailer following because he had no choice. 30 feet. That's all they had before the curse returned. Her treacherous body was counting on it. The compulsion dragged her through the fortress like a hooked fish, down corridors and through gardens she'd never seen, with Mailer trailing behind, confused, concerned, and growing more panicked with each step. Guards tried to stop them, but Mailer waved them off, clearly sensing this was something worse than a midnight walk. They ended up in an abandoned tower on the eastern wall. And there, waiting in the moonlight like he'd orchestrated every moment of this nightmare, was Draven. "There she is," he said with that familiar smile that made Naira's skin crawl. "Right on time. What did you do to her?" Mailer's voice was lethal, the curse already stirring beneath his skin. Naira wanted to touch him, to calm the rage, but her body wouldn't obey. She stood frozen 5 feet away, trembling with the effort of trying to break whatever invisible chains held her. "Nothing new," Draven replied casually. "Just activating something I planted years ago. Tell me, Naira, did you really think rejection was just words and ceremony? That I could cast you out with nothing but public humiliation?" Her throat worked, but the compulsion wouldn't let her speak. Draven stepped closer, circling her like prey. "The night I rejected you, while you were unconscious from the pain of the severed mate bond, I carved a binding rune into your soul. A little insurance policy." He traced a finger along her scar, and Naira felt phantom pain bloom beneath his touch. "It's been dormant all this time, waiting for me to activate it. Waiting for the moment I needed you to come to me, no matter who tried to keep you away." "You bastard," Mailer snarled, closing the distance. But Draven raised a hand and Naira's body moved between them, her arms spreading wide to block Mailer's path.
Draven.
"Attack me, and she'll defend me. That's the beauty of blood runes. They override even Souls Park bonds when properly activated. Right now, Naira's body thinks I'm her alpha and you're the threat." He walked around her rigid form. "It must be terrifying, Nitrath. Watching your precious anchor turned into my puppet." Naira felt tears streaming down her face, even as her body remained frozen in defense of the man she hated most. Inside, she was screaming, fighting, clawing at the invisible chains. But her body wouldn't listen. Wouldn't move except as Draven commanded. "Let her go," Maelor said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. The curse was building, shadows coiling under his skin. Naira could feel it, could feel his desperate need for her touch, but the compulsion kept her rooted in place. "This isn't about her anymore. It's about you and me. Let her go, and face me properly." "Oh, I will face you. Tomorrow at dawn, as promised." Draven pulled a small vial from his pocket, holding it up to catch the moonlight. The liquid inside was dark purple, almost black. "But I wanted you to see this first. Bloodthorn poison. Extremely rare. Extremely effective. 1 drop in an alpha's bloodstream, and their healing slows to nothing. Their strength drains. Their wolf becomes sluggish, confused. The duel is supposed to be clean," Maelor growled. "No weapons, no magic." "No weapons you can see," Draven corrected. "But who said anything about poison?" He held up his other hand, showing claws that gleamed with the same purple sheen. "I've been building immunity for months. 1 scratch tomorrow, and you'll spend the entire fight getting weaker while I get stronger. And the best part?" He looked at Naira with mock sympathy. "Your soul's spark will feel every moment of it. Feel you dying. Feel the bond breaking. And she won't be able to do a damn thing to stop it, because she'll be too far away to reach you." The words broke something in Naira. She fought against the compulsion with everything she had, every ounce of will and rage and desperate love. Her fingers twitched. Just barely, but they moved. Draven noticed. His smile faded. "Interesting. The Veilborn power is trying to override my rune. You're stronger than I thought, Naira." "Good. That means you'll be even more useful once I win you back." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. "Stop fighting, little Omega. You know how this ends. You've always known. The strong claim what they want and the weak submit. That's the way our world works." "Our world is broken," Naira forced out through gritted teeth, her jaw unlocking just enough to speak. "And you're proof of it." Draven's expression hardened, defiant until the end. "I really did break you too well." He turned back to Maelor. "Tomorrow at dawn, Nitrath. Bring your cursed rage and your borrowed time. I'll bring this." He held up the poison vial again. "And when I'm standing over your corpse, when your kingdom is scrambling for a new king, I'll take Naira home and finish what I started. I'll unlock her full Veilborn potential and build an empire with her power." He walked toward the tower exit, then paused. "Oh, and Naira? The binding rune doesn't just let me control your body. It lets me feel your emotions. And right now, I can feel your fear, your desperation, your knowledge that no matter what you do, you're still mine." His smile returned. "Sleep well, little Omega. Tomorrow, everything changes." The compulsion released the moment he left. Naira collapsed, and Maelor caught her before she hit the ground. The curse immediately calmed at her touch, but Maelor was shaking, with rage, with fear, with the terrible understanding of what they were facing. "He's going to cheat," Naira sobbed against his chest. "He's going to poison you, and I won't be able to reach you, and—" "I know," Maelor said quietly, his arms tightening around her. "I know." They stayed there on the cold tower floor, 2 souls bound together by impossible magic, facing an enemy who'd already proven he'd do anything to win. And for the first time since she'd touched him in that throne room, Naira felt true despair. Because even if Maelor won the duel, Draven's binding rune meant she'd never truly be free. She was still a prisoner, still a weapon, still exactly what Draven had spent years making her. And tomorrow, one way or another, someone she loved was going to die. Dawn came too quickly, painting the dueling grounds in shades of blood and gold. The entire court had gathered to witness the challenge, nobles and warriors forming a ring around the ancient circle where alphas had settled disputes for centuries. Maelor stood on one side, his expression carved from stone. Draven waited on the other, his claws already gleaming with that telltale purple sheen. And Naira stood between them, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might shatter her ribs. "This is wrong," she said, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. "All of it. Two alphas fighting over an omega, like she's property to be claimed. An alpha who carved binding runes into someone's soul. A duel that's been rigged with poison before it even begins." She turned to face the assembled court, feeling the weight of every eye on her. "I won't be a prize. Not anymore. Not ever again. The challenge has been issued and accepted," Tavrin said carefully, though his ancient eyes showed concern. "Once begun, the duel cannot be." "I invoke the blood vow right," Naira said, the words feeling like they'd been torn from somewhere deep in her chest. "I claim the right to trial by the moon goddess herself." The effect was instantaneous. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Tavrin went pale. Even Maelor looked shocked, though he quickly tried to hide it. Only Draven seemed unaffected, his expression darkening with rage. "You can't," Draven said, taking a step toward her. The binding rune on her neck flared with heat, trying to compel her to stop speaking, to submit. But Naira pushed through the pain, her voice steady. "I can, and I do. Ancient law, older than pack bonds, older than alpha challenges. An omega who believes she's been wronged can petition the moon goddess directly for judgment." She looked at Tavrin. "Isn't that right, advisor?" "Yes," Tavrin said slowly, wonderingly. "But Miss Soul Shadow, the blood vow right is deadly," Naira finished. "I know. I read about it in the archives. The Omega enters the sacred sanctum alone and faces the goddess's judgment. If found worthy, the bonds that chain her are broken. If found wanting..." She didn't need to finish. Everyone knew the price of the goddess's rejection was death. "This is absurd," Draven snarled. "I carved that binding rune. I own that bond. Some ancient superstition won't." The great bells of Ashenfell began to toll. Deep, resonant sounds that seemed to come from the earth itself rather than the towers.
Once. Twice.
3 times. The ancient acknowledgement that the blood vow right had been invoked. "The right cannot be refused once declared," Tavrin said, his voice carrying a weight of centuries. "Not by alphas, not by kings, not even by blood runes. When an omega calls to the moon goddess, the goddess answers." He turned to Naira, and she saw fear for her in his eyes. "The sanctum is prepared. But child, you should know, no one has survived the blood vow right in over 200 years. The last omega who tried was found dead at the altar." Her heart stopped mid-beat. "I know the risks." Naira looked at Maelor, saw the anguish in his face, the desperate desire to stop her warring with the knowledge that he couldn't. "But I'd rather die on my own terms than live as anyone's weapon, as anyone's prisoner." "Naira, please." Maelor started forward, but the bells tolled again, a warning. During the rite, no one could touch the petitioner. No one could interfere. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "just for him. But this is the only way I can be free. Free to choose. Free to love. Free to be more than what Draven made me." She touched her chest where she could feel the soul's spark bond humming. "If I survive this, I'll come back to you. Not because a bond forces me to, but because I want to. And if you don't survive..." His voice broke. "Then at least I'll die as myself. Not as his weapon or your anchor. Just me." The bells tolled a final time. The sanctum doors, ancient silver that had been sealed for generations, groaned open, revealing darkness that seemed to pulse with otherworldly light. Naira walked toward them, each step feeling like the hardest thing she'd ever done. Behind her, she heard Draven shouting, felt the binding rune trying to drag her back. But the bell's power was stronger, older, tied to magic that predated any alpha's claim. At the threshold, she paused and looked back. Maelor stood frozen, his hands clenched at his sides, shadows already creeping under his skin. Without her touch, the curse would return. He might not survive until she came back out. If she came back out, "Fight it," she told him.
Please.
"Fight it until I return." Then Naira stepped into the sanctum, into the moonlit darkness, and the silver doors slammed shut behind her with the finality of a tomb sealing. The sanctum swallowed Naira whole, and suddenly, she was no longer in Ashenfell. She was standing in the Emberclaw Pack Square, 18 years old again, wearing the white ceremonial dress reserved for Omegas about to be claimed by their alphas. The memory hit her with visceral clarity, the excited whispers of the crowd, the flowers woven into her hair, the foolish hope blooming in her chest that this was the beginning of her happily ever after. Then Draven's voice, cold and cutting through the celebration like a blade. "I reject you, Naira Soul Shadow. You are unworthy of the Emberclaw name, unworthy of my bond, unworthy of love." She felt it again, the mate bond he'd carefully cultivated shattering like glass in her chest. The white dress suddenly feeling like a burial shroud. The flowers in her hair wilting as pack members turned away, their faces twisted with pity or disgust. The weight of worthlessness settling onto her shoulders like a physical thing. "No," Naira whispered, but the memory wouldn't stop. It dragged her forward through years of wandering, of sleeping in stables, of working for scraps, while carrying the rejection scar that told everyone she met that she was damaged goods. She watched herself grow smaller, quieter, more invisible with each passing day. Watched herself accept the narrative that she was broken, powerless, unlovable. "This is what he made you believe," a voice said, ancient and vast as the night sky. The sanctum shifted, and suddenly Naira stood before an altar bathed in silver moonlight. A figure materialized, not quite solid, more like moonbeams given form, the moon goddess herself. "But tell me, child, do you believe it still?" "I don't know," Naira said honestly. "Sometimes I look at Maelor and think, maybe I'm worth something. But then I remember Draven's binding rune, how easily my body betrayed me, and I wonder if I'll ever really be free. If I'll ever really be more than what he made me." "You have been broken," the goddess said, her voice carrying both sorrow and something harder. "Shattered deliberately by an alpha who saw your potential and feared it. But breaking is not the end of your story, Naira Soul Shadow. It is only the middle. The question I ask you now is this: will you break others, or will you heal?" The sanctum shifted again. Naira found herself watching a possible future. She stood over Draven's corpse, her hands still glowing with the power she'd used to redirect his rage back onto him until his heart burst. Around her, Emberclaw wolves cowered in fear, and the expression on her face was Draven's smile.
Cold.
Victorious. "Pull. You could choose rage," the goddess said. "Become the weapon he tried to make you. Use your Veilborn power not to heal, but to destroy. Every alpha who ever heard an Omega, every pack that cast out the rejected, you could make them all pay. You could become their nightmare." The vision felt seductive. After years of powerlessness, the thought of making them all suffer the way she'd suffered sang through Naira's veins like dark honey. Then the vision shifted again. This time she saw herself standing beside Maelor, not as his anchor, but as his equal. Saw Ashenfell transformed into a sanctuary where rejected wolves found purpose. Saw other Omegas looking at her with hope instead of fear. Saw the possibility of a world where broken didn't mean worthless. "Or you could choose grace," the goddess continued. "Forgive yourself for believing the lies. Forgive Draven not because he deserves it, but because holding on to hate will poison everything you touch. Use your power to heal rather than harm, to build rather than break." "That's not fair," Naira said, tears streaming down her face. "He tortured me, manipulated me, carved runes into my soul. Why should I forgive that?" "I did not say it was fair, child. I said it was a choice. The hardest choice any broken thing ever faces, whether to let the breaking define them, or transform them." Naira looked at both visions, felt the pull of each path. The rage would be easier, would feel righteous, would give her power over everyone who'd ever made her feel small. But it would also make her exactly what Draven had tried to create, a weapon that destroyed rather than healed. "I choose grace," Naira whispered, the words feeling like they cost her something vital. "I choose to forgive. Not him, not yet, maybe not ever, but myself, for believing I was worthless. for accepting the narrative that breaking meant I couldn't be put back together stronger. The moon goddess smiled, and it was terrible and beautiful. Then receive my judgment, Naira Soul Shadow. You are worthy. You are whole. You are free. Light exploded through the sanctum. Naira screamed as the binding rune on her neck, Draven's final chain, shattered. She felt a tear from her soul like fishhooks being ripped out, felt blood that wasn't quite blood pour from the wound. But beneath the agony was something else. Something awakening. Power flooded through her veins, silver and ancient and hers. Her Veil-born abilities, no longer suppressed or controlled, blazed to life like a star being born. She could feel every alpha's rage within 100 miles, including Maelor's curse, still consuming him outside the sanctum. Could feel how to absorb it, redirect it, transform it from destruction into something that could heal. The sanctum doors burst open. Naira stumbled out into dawn light, no longer the broken Omega who'd entered. She was radiant, silver light pouring from her skin like she'd swallowed the moon itself. Her ejection scar had transformed completely, no longer a mark of shame, but a silver pattern that looked like moonlight trapped beneath her skin. The assembled court gasped. Maelor, who'd been on his knees fighting the curse, looked up with wonder and relief, and something that might have been love. But Naira's eyes found Draven, saw the shock and rage warring on his face as he realized what she'd become. The binding rune is broken, she said, her voice carrying power it had never held before. Your claim is shattered, and I am no one's weapon but my own. She was free. Finally, terribly, beautifully free. And the real battle was about to begin. Naira emerged from the sanctum to chaos. The duel had already begun, Maelor and Draven circling each other in the ancient ring, both bloodied, both snarling with primal fury. But even from a distance, Naira could see that something was terribly wrong. Maelor was moving too slowly, his strikes lacking their usual power. Dark purple veins were spreading from a gash on his shoulder, crawling across his skin like poison roots. The Bloodthorn. Draven had gotten to him. Stop. Naira's voice rang out across the dueling grounds, amplified by the power still thrumming through her veins. Every head turned. The fighting froze. Maelor's eyes widened when he saw her. No longer the broken Omega who'd entered the sanctum, but something transformed. Silver light poured from her skin, her rejection scar now a luminous pattern that looked like captured starlight. She was radiant, untouchable, and utterly changed. The rite is complete, Tavern breathed, his voice carrying across the stunned silence.
She survived.
The moon goddess found her worthy. Impossible, Draven snarled, but Naira could see the fear creeping into his eyes. The binding rune. I felt it break, but you shouldn't be. You can't be. I'm everything you tried to prevent me from becoming, Naira said, walking toward the dueling circle. The crowd parted for her like water, none daring to stand in her path. A Veil-born in full power, free of your chains, free of your control, and very, very angry. She stepped into the ring and immediately felt Maelor's pain like it was her own. The poison was spreading fast, shutting down his healing, draining his strength. The curse writhed beneath his skin, taking advantage of his weakness, trying to consume him while he was vulnerable. Naira, stay back, Maelor managed, even as he swayed on his feet. The poison if he touches you. He won't touch me, Naira said with absolute certainty. She moved to Maelor's side and placed both hands on his chest, directly over his heart. And you're not dying today. The Veil-born power blazed through her, no longer a trickle, but a flood. She could feel the poison in Maelor's bloodstream, could sense its molecular structure, understand exactly how it was killing him. And with a thought, she pulled it out. Maelor gasped as purple-black ichor began seeping from his pores, drawn out by Naira's touch like she was a magnet for toxins. The veins receded. His color returned. And beneath the poison, she could feel the curse, that ancient rage that had consumed 7 generations of Nitrath kings, waiting to strike. But now, with her full power awakened, Naira could see what the curse truly was. Not some unstoppable madness, but concentrated rage with nowhere to go. Energy that needed to be transformed, not just suppressed. So she transformed it. Silver light flooded through Mailer, through the bond that connected them, and Naira felt the curse dissolve, not pushed down or held back, but actually purified. The rage converted into something else entirely. Strength without violence. Power without madness. The curse that had killed every king in his bloodline simply ended. Mailer's eyes cleared completely. Not just calm, but free. For the first time in his life, there was no shadow of madness lurking beneath the surface. No ticking clock counting down to his inevitable destruction. "It's gone," he whispered, staring at his hands like he couldn't believe what he was feeling. "The curse is actually gone."
No.
Draven roared, and suddenly he was lunging, not at Mailer, but at Naira. His claws, still coated in bloodthorn poison, aimed straight for her throat. "You're mine. You've always been mine. I made you what you are." Naira turned to face him, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She could feel his rage like a living thing, could sense every ounce of fury and desperation and wounded pride that drove him. And with her newly awakened power, she could do something she'd never been able to do before. She could give it back to him. Draven's charge stopped mid-stride. His eyes went wide as his own rage, amplified and redirected, slammed back into him like a physical force. He screamed, falling to his knees, hands clutching his head as he experienced the full weight of every cruel thing he'd ever done. Every Omega he'd broken. Every pack member he'd manipulated. Every life he'd destroyed in his quest for power. "This is what you made others feel," Naira said quietly, standing over him. "This is the pain you inflicted so casually, so deliberately. Feel it all, Draven. Every moment of it." "Please," he gasped, and for the first time since she'd known him, there was genuine anguish in his voice. "Please make it stop." I can't. "You can," Naira said, "because I survived it. And I'm stronger than you ever gave me credit for." She released the redirected rage slowly, watching as he collapsed forward, trembling and broken. "But you don't get to die. You don't get that escape. You're going to live with what you've done. Every day, every moment, until you truly understand what it means to be powerless." She looked up at the Emberclaw wolves who'd come with him, saw the shock and uncertainty on their faces. "Your alpha carved binding runes into my soul, plotted to poison a king, rigged a sacred duel. He's violated every law our kind holds sacred." Her voice carried across the entire assembly. "I could kill him. The moon goddess gave me that right. But I choose mercy. I choose to let him live as a cautionary tale, what happens when power corrupts completely." "The Emberclaw pack is banished from Ashenfell," Mailer said, his voice strong and clear for the first time in days. "Draven is stripped of his alpha status. Any Omega in his pack who wishes sanctuary here will receive it. The rest have 1 hour to leave my kingdom." The Emberclaw wolves scattered like leaves in a storm. Some fled immediately. Others, mostly Omegas and lower-ranked pack members, stayed, drawn by the promise of sanctuary. Draven himself had to be carried away by his remaining loyalists, still shaking from the psychic assault. When the dueling grounds finally emptied, Naira found herself alone with Mailer. The silver light was fading from her skin, the immediate rush of power settling into something more sustainable. She suddenly felt exhausted, like she'd run for days without stopping. "You saved me," Mailer said, catching her as she swayed.
Again.
"You keep saving me." "We saved each other," Naira corrected, leaning into his warmth. "That's what anchors do." "Is that what we are? Still just Anchor and Alpha?" Naira pulled back enough to meet his eyes, those winter storm eyes that were finally, truly clear. "I don't know what we are," she admitted. "But I know what I want us to be."
"If you'll have me."
"Not because a bond forces it, but because I choose it." Mailer's smile was everything. "I choose you too, Naira Soul Shadow. Broken, powerful, impossible you. Today, and every day after." When he kissed her, It felt like coming home. 3 months after the duel, Naira stood in the throne room wearing a crown that had been forged specifically for her. Not the traditional queen's diadem passed down through generations, but something new, silver wrought to look like moonlight, embedded with stones that glowed when she used her veil-born abilities. A crown that represented not inheritance, but choice. The coronation ceremony had been unlike anything Ashenfell had witnessed before. Maelor hadn't simply declared her as queen. He'd knelt before the assembled court and asked if she would rule beside him. Not as his possession, not as his anchor, but as his equal partner. And Naira, wearing a gown the color of starlight, had said yes. Now, as the celebration continued in the great hall below, she found herself in the council chamber with Tavrin and a handful of advisors, finalizing the laws that would reshape their kingdom forever. The Sanctuary Edict, Tavrin read aloud, his voice carrying both approval and wonder, decrees that any wolf rejected by their pack may claim refuge in Ashenfell. They will be given housing, work, and the opportunity to rebuild their lives without shame or stigma. He looked up at Naira. Your Majesty, do you understand how radical this is? Rejected wolves have always been seen as broken, worthless, disposable. Naira finished, her voice steady. I know. I was one of them. That's exactly why this law matters. The court will resist, one of the older advisors warned. Tradition states that rejection marks an Omega as fundamentally flawed. To welcome them openly. Tradition also said a cursed king had to die mad and alone. Maelor interrupted, entering the chamber with the easy authority that came from no longer fighting his own nature every moment. Tradition said a Soulspark bond would consume both parties. Tradition said a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. He moved to stand beside Naira, their hands finding each other naturally. We're building something better than tradition. We're building something true. The second law was even more controversial, the Recognition Decree, which formally acknowledged and protected rare wolf types that had previously been feared or hunted. Veil-born Omegas like Naira. Sentinels who could sense danger before it struck. Seers who caught glimpses of possible futures. Dreamwalkers who could enter others' minds. All the wolves who'd spent centuries hiding their abilities for fear of being labeled dangerous or demonic. They're not anomalies, Naira had argued during the drafting sessions. They're gifts, and we're going to treat them as such. The third law was perhaps the most revolutionary, the Omega Rights Charter, which gave Omegas legal protection from force bonds, the right to refuse any Alpha's claim, and voting representation on the Royal Council. For the first time in Ashenfell's 1,000-year history, Omegas would have voices that couldn't be silenced. Some Alphas will leave rather than accept these changes, Tavrin warned. They'll see it as an insult to the natural order. Let them leave, Naira said firmly. We don't need Alphas who think power means the right to dominate. We need ones who understand that true strength comes from lifting others up, not pushing them down. In the weeks following the law's announcement, Ashenfell transformed. Rejected wolves began arriving from across the realm, Omegas bearing scars like Naira once had, Betas who'd been cast out for defending them, even a few Alphas who'd been exiled for refusing to participate in their pack's cruelty. They came cautiously at first, hardly daring to believe the sanctuary was real. But Naira met each one personally, showed them her own transformation, proved that broken could become powerful, that rejected could become chosen, that the end of one story could be the beginning of something extraordinary. The kingdom watched their new queen with something between awe and devotion. She wasn't like the rulers they'd known before, distant, untouchable, concerned only with power and politics. She worked in the kitchens alongside servants, visited the healing halls to help treat the injured with her veil-born abilities, sat in the gardens with newly arrived refugees and listened to their stories without judgment. You're going to exhaust yourself, Maelor told her one evening, finding her still awake long after midnight, reviewing petitions from wolves seeking sanctuary. I can't stop, Naira said, though she let him pull her away from the desk and into his arms. Every petition is someone like me, someone who is told they were worthless and is daring to hope they might be wrong. How can I rest when they're still waiting? Because even queens need sleep, Malor murmured against her hair. Even transformed, powerful, impossible queens who've already changed the world. He tilted her face up to his. You don't have to save everyone personally, Naira. You've already given them the most important thing, proof that salvation is possible. She leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart, no longer plagued by curse or rage, just the simple rhythm of a man who'd found peace. Did you ever imagine this? She asked. That night in the throne room when I touched you, did you imagine we'd end up here? No, Malor admitted. I imagined borrowed time and inevitable tragedy. I imagined holding on to you as long as I could before the curse consumed us both. His arms tightened around her. I never imagined freedom. Never imagined building something that might actually last. We're going to make it last, Naira promised. This kingdom, these laws, this proof that the old ways can be changed. We're going to make it all last. 6 months after her coronation, Naira stood on the royal balcony overlooking Ashenfell as the sun set in shades of gold and crimson. Below, the kingdom thrived. Refugees who'd arrived broken now walked with purpose, their children playing in streets that had once seemed forbidden to them. The rejected had become the foundation of something new. Malor joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. Together they watched their kingdom, no longer ruled by fear or curse or the crushing weight of tradition, but by the revolutionary idea that everyone deserved a second chance, that broken could be made whole, that love freely chosen was stronger than any bond magic could forge. What are you thinking? Malor asked softly. Naira smiled, placing her hands over his. I'm thinking that once upon a time, I was an Omega no one wanted, rejected, scarred, convinced I was worthless. She turned in his arms to face him. And now I'm a queen who rewrote the rules, who proved that the narrative can be changed, that we're all more than the worst thing anyone ever said about us. You're remarkable, Malor said, and the wonder in his voice suggested he still couldn't quite believe she was real. We're remarkable, Naira corrected, pulling him down for a kiss that tasted like sunset and second chances. Together. Always together. Below them, Ashenfell prepared for evening. Lights began flickering in windows. Families gathered for meals. Rejected wolves who'd found sanctuary here settled into lives they'd once thought impossible. And in the royal palace, 2 souls who'd saved each other stood watching the world they'd rebuilt from ashes. The curse was broken. The chains were shattered. And love, fierce, freely chosen, unbreakable love, had rewritten fate itself. This was not the ending anyone had predicted for a cursed king and a rejected Omega. But it was the beginning they'd both earned. And it was only the start of the legend they would become.